You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate, on Desert Rock FM.
Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate radio show, recording live from the Diamantina Shire and the Old City District here at Desert Rock FM. Now, you're joined today by, of course, myself, Clancy Overall, editor of the Betoota Advocate, and, of course, editor-at-large, Errol Parker. Today we have a guest who actually, it's quarantine. Everyone's quarantining right around the world. We're getting pretty lucky with the guests because there's a lot of people sitting at home. They're learning how to use Zoom. They're learning how to keep in touch, and they've got a lot of time in their hands. And because of that, we've been lucky enough to land ourselves an interview with Sir Bob Geldof. I'm not sure if he appreciates the Sir. Australians certainly
maybe in
do.
some circles.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I'm trying to get into a crowded restaurant or upgraded,
in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, it'd definitely
Might
fly
not
here.
fly in the Republic, but anyway.
No, guys, it's just I've done, I ran out of papers to talk to in the lockdown, so you're sort of bottom of the list, really. So,
Really?
Finally I got there, but great,
I'm glad we beat Murdoch to you. Now, where are you based at this moment? All we got obviously was a Zoom address.
I'm in
quarantining.
Kent.
Yep.
I'm in Kent. I got a place in Kent about 50 miles out of London. The weather has been the hottest spring ever, I think it is. It's the driest May. So in those terms, it's been... I got the family around because they bailed out of London as well, which was the epicenter. It's moved now. So they're around, and I have the most mowed lawn and the most cleaned car ever. And as soon as Kenny Rogers died, I noticed a vacancy, so I grew a white beard. That's my contribution to the standstill.
Yeah. You're at the point now where you're mowing tennis courts.
My chin.
Now, after 36 years, the Boomtown Rats have released a new album, and it's also accompanied by a book that you've written and a film that's coming out soon. Just to take it back to the start, you've come out of South Dublin, you've gone into these odd jobs, you worked in a slaughterhouse, you worked on the roads. What I really want to know is that your first real gig in music was in Vancouver. I mean, that's not really a real epicenter for young Irish like it is down here in Australia. I mean, how did you find yourself in Vancouver all those years ago?
One of the gigs, as you said, was working on the roads, and I could drive heavy machinery, the Terex T24, if you've ever seen them. They're the big things with 12-foot high heels, that would be good, wheels, with an engine in the front and back and a digger in the middle. I could drive those things. There were jobs in the roads stopped building in Britain in the winter because of the rain and that. You just can't really dig up the roads. Jobs were advertised for mining gold north of the Yukon in the Arctic Circle.
Right.
The money was insane.
So not really Vancouver.
Yeah. So I was an illegal immigrant. I worked in the abattoir then in the slaughterhouse because they'd only let you work in the Arctic if you had a woman with you. And I'd just been dumped. And so I had to go back to Ireland as the dumpee and, try and woo my true love to come with me up to the fucking Arctic Circle, which, as you can imagine, was not that attractive, having just been dumped, stinking of offal as I worked in the slaughterhouse. She eventually agreed to come with me. The deal was that the women would be on 50% pay for 6 months while they trained, and then they'd be on equal pay with men. It's kind of like, I think, up around up in the top end where the mining is, over in Western Australia. And they'd fly it down then every 3 weeks for 10 days in Miami. So it was a huge deal. And I was an illegal. We went across Canada on the Greyhound. I pitched up in Vancouver to get my illegal papers together, which took about a month. And I got bored, and I went down to the hippie part of town. Yeah. It was around the time when Rolling Stone magazine was a local magazine in San Francisco, the Berkeley Barb, all those sort of things. There was an underground paper there called the Georgia Straight. I saw the bookshop they had a little ad saying, people wanted to work in the bookshop, so I went in, got a job in the bookshop. Then I went upstairs and I just lied my way into a job. I just said I was a visiting journalist on holiday, but as I had I went on holiday, I had no exams of my work.
The accent resume.
Yeah.
Yeah. So send me out to review local bands. If you don't like it, don't print it. So it turned out it was okay. I got to be the music editor after 3 months. Then I got to be the circulation manager because I was fed up people weren't reading these pearls of, wisdom that were being put. And then after about a year, the Mounties got their man, which was me.
Yeah.
I got to be, I was a smart ass. I was on the radio. People were arguing about the opinions I was writing about music. Music was shit, I was, I think it all ended when I got a record by the Stylistics, who were a sort of vocal group.
Yeah.
And the review was, "This is shit." And that was it. That was the review. And, at which point I was ejected from Canada and I went back to Ireland, and Ireland was still mired in an absolute of nullity. And I started a band to try and alter that.
I've got a quote here that you said in 1975. Correct me if I'm wrong. You only started a rock and roll band to, quote, get rich, get famous, and get laid. How did that work out for you?
And bring peace to Ireland.
Well, I got rich. I got famous. I said in the piece that I only wanted to get famous. I've been poor all my life. It's shit. Mm-hmm. There's no upside at all to poverty. It just is. Poverty is a sort of prevention of human capital sort of thing. Yeah. I wanted to get rich for obvious reasons. I wanted to get famous so I could talk about the things that bothered me. And I wanted to get laid because I've been brought up in Catholic Ireland of the 1970s. Believe me, I desperately wanted to get laid. And so, and rock and roll was the vehicle for all of that. But largely the band needed to get out of Ireland. Yeah. Ireland, that was it. And I don't know if you've seen the film, which went out on the BBC last Saturday. It's called Citizens of Boomtown, like the album. I found it interesting. I'm in the thing, but it's like, when you look at old movies your parents took of you at 7, you're kind of looking at it and there's you and you're kind of, okay, there's me, cute, but it doesn't feel like you particularly. Yeah. And that's kind of what it was like. But what was interesting, and for me anyway, if no one else, was that I hadn't realized that none of us had families, none.
Yeah.
So in my case, my mum died when I was 7. The only job my dad could get was selling towels around the countryside of rural Ireland, where I doubt they'd even heard of what a fucking towel was. But so he'd go away on Monday and come back on Friday. So there was no authority in the house, no one to make me do any work. So when I bumped into authority in school every day, like the priests, it wasn't a good meeting.
Yeah.
No.
I didn't understand what that was, so I'd get beaten, and then later I'd bump into a cop, and I couldn't quite understand how he had the ability to tell me to do things. So that was always a problem.
Yeah.
The other guys in the band, one had, and I didn't understand this until I saw the film last year, one had a brutally dysfunctional family.
Yeah, right.
But, we didn't talk about it. We're blokes, and, we just wanted to get on the band.
Yeah.
And then the others were all packed off to boarding school at a young age. So that was really, I think, important when we fell in together in the garage in the back. There was a real need to bind together.
Yeah.
Really. And then you enter into the economic world as you leave school. The state, which you can view as the sort of larger family, if you like, fails you also. It offers you no future whatsoever. And in Ireland's case at the time, we were mired in what was in effect a civil war. They don't call it that, but when 3,600 people are murdered, it is. And when it's with the tacit complicity, if not overt complicity, of the national government, it's murder. And when the church is busily abusing the children of its parishioners and shutting up about the murders, and when the business community is shutting up because they're making money out of it all, then something has to give.
Yeah.
And there was this great silence, sort of cultural suffocation, if you like.
Yeah.
And so the only thing to do is make a noise. And so that's what we did.
That's one thing I want to ask about. What were the pubs like in Ireland when you finally found a publican that would let you kids do whatever you wanted?
There were 3 gigs in Dublin. So
Really?
you've got to understand, there was no rock radio, there was no rock television, there was no rock magazines, there were no posters for gigs. You know, it was just nothing. And I just spent a year writing about, you know, what was beginning to happen in the early 70s, Bowie, Roxy Music, Lou Reed. That was where I was at, the Velvet Underground sort of thing. Not crazy about what other stuff was going on. I thought this was kind of the way forward. Very basic stuff like Muddy Waters and earlier. So those sort of things were where I was at. Or The Who, you know, proper stuff like that. The bands were copyists.
Yep.
They were, you know, either country rock, but really good ones. There was a guy, Cheap Thrills was a band, which was really good. There was a funk outfit called Night Bus. So, you know, crap names.
Yeah.
You know, Night Bus. It meant nothing. So calling yourself the Boomtown Rats, you know, people objected to
Electric
that. They thought it was
Light
nasty.
Orchestra.
Yeah, please, thank you,
Terrible
goodbye.
names.
You know, yeah. But you see, you've hit a major point here, guys.
Yeah.
Once the definite article left rock and roll, it went shit.
Yeah.
So once you stopped having the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kings, the Who,
The Pink Floyd.
and you started getting Genesis.
Yeah.
Yes, you know, Electric Light Orchestra, Electric Shite Orchestra. You know, like
Nirvana could have used the Nirvana.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But but you had this whole generation. The big thing about punk was bringing back the definite article, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Boomtown Rats, the Saints.
Yeah.
So where did the name Boomtown Rats come from?
Yeah.
I mean, like from a rank outsider, from being out of Ireland at that time, you know, you could say it's come out of the Troubles, but from what I've read, it comes from a much different place.
The Troubles really didn't affect us, as I've been saying. They would be page 3 of the paper, though they were 100 miles north only of us. But in Ireland, given that it's 200 miles in length, more or less, and Dublin's stuck in the middle, and then it's 100 miles to Galway in the far west, it's small. But because it was so alien to us, the Troubles, which sound like a minor dose of political flu, was in fact 3,600 murders. So I kind of object to that. They try and dampen it down. It was terrible. In our case, we were just kicking back against the Republic, which was mired in some sort of economic and cultural aspect of the 19th century or something. You know, it was just terrible to live there at the time. Luckily, Ireland rocketed into the 21st century over the last 15, 18 years and became a proper country. But the Boomtown Rats came because I was reading Woody Guthrie's biography, Bound for Glory. Woody Guthrie is the great poet of the impoverished and dispossessed in 1920s, 1930s Depression America. And of course, Bob Dylan's master, Springsteen's master, and great influence. I liked all these early guys because when I was a kid, the music I was listening to obviously was the Stones and all that, Bob Dylan and that. I was 10 or 11. And they were telling us, Mick and Keith were proselytizers. They were saying, it's not us, it's Muddy Waters, it's Lightning Hopkins, it's Howling Wolf. You know, hello? Muddy Waters, Howling Wolf. I mean, are these forces of nature or people? In fact, both. And Dylan was talking about Woody Guthrie and, in fact, imitating him entirely. So I started listening to these guys and just thought it was magnificent music. And I read then Guthrie's biography, but I was rereading it in 1975, and we had a couple of names. I'd come up with the Nightlife Thugs, because I wanted a name you could shorten. And the Thugs sounded like, you know, and Night Bus, Cheap Thrills are the Thugs. Well, I'm going to see the Thugs, you know. So I wanted to suggest something that you would hear or see before you even heard or saw it. But the night before the first gig, I was rereading Bound for Glory for no particular reason. And I came across a bit where Woody Guthrie was 11 years old, and he was in some town where they lived, and the boom chasers came to town, the guys who followed the latest oil rush. And they found oil outside Woody's town in Oklahoma, and these new families came in with the new kids, and new kids wanted to join the gangs, the kids' gangs in town, but the old gangs wouldn't let them in because they were migrants, and, forget it. So Woody split from the old gang and set up his new gang, which only allowed the new kids in.
Yeah, right.
So the head of the old gang goes to Woody and says, "Are we going to have a war?" And Woody says, "Yeah, whatever you like." The head of the old gang, who's 12 or 11, says, you boomtown rats, you.
Right.
And I thought, yeah, fuck yeah. I don't want to be part of the old gang. I'll take you on. And we were sitting in the pub before the first gig, which was in a school. I said, listen, that name, I said, yeah, it's okay. I said, what about the Boomtown Rats? And they said, yeah, that's better. And once it had a hint, once it had a reason. But the truth of it is, seriously, once I got the name, it made total sense to me. Rather than just playing music on a Friday or Saturday night because we were bored and nothing to do, suddenly, because it came from Woody Guthrie and there was an aim behind the name, the band had intent and purpose, clear intent and purpose. So when I began writing songs, I began writing about the people I was working with in the slaughterhouse. This wasn't just a slaughterhouse of animals. This was an abattoir of human dreams. They were stuck. We were stuck. That became our first number one, the first Irish number one, the first new wave number one. So I just started writing about all the people around me because of that name. Now I knew what I should write about. So it was more important than, just picking some crap pun like the Beatles, which has got to be one of the worst names in rock and roll. Beat, get it, guys? Liked it.
They keep the beat.
Yeah.
You entered, I guess, the charts, and you began this career with this band with an undertone of working class solidarity. Did it become a bit of a ballad? Was it a bit of a, similar to what Jimmy Barnes was for us, or what Bruce was in the 70s and 80s?
There's always a counterculture, and there's always a rejection of a counterculture. Yeah. It works both ways, and it's a sort of tired trope when you get involved in it. But we weren't necessarily involved in a counterculture, or that we thought we were. The moment I got on TV, and they go into this in the film, I thought I'd only ever be on TV once. I just kicked off about the country. And so there was a group of young people, Bono and his mates, who were about 13, 14, these sort of people, Sinead O'Connor, watching this and going, finally, somebody's just talking about what it's like to be here. So we made a noise, and by talking about it, burst that bubble of silence and began, it helped to change things a little. And then by making records and focusing on getting them into the charts, because that's how you get your message to a broader audience, you had to change music. But we arrived in London in the middle of what we now know to be a massive cultural revolution, which was the punk thing. And it was beginning. Never Mind the Bollocks by the Pistols had yet to come out. It was a couple of months away. We'd finished our first album, but we weren't coming out till after the Pistols. And when I heard their record, I thought, we're fucked. That's so great a record. So whereas you had Jimmy Barnes, who's sort of a working class hero, and Bruce too, we kind of had Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy or Van Morrison, I guess. Yeah. But there's no equivalent to Jimmy or thing. Our equivalent would be the Saints.
Yeah.
Who were a great band, and when we arrived in London, our first gigs, because punk was a London thing and they were very snobbish about these paddies who just arrived off the boat. Yeah. So we were friendly with the Pistols because Johnny's Irish, first generation, extremely. And, his family I went up to their flat in Finchley in Dickensian poverty. The Clash were put together by Joe and stuff like that. So we played with the Ramones and the Talking Heads, and we played in schools at 4:00 in the afternoon. And so if you can imagine all these kids with mullets and like Bay City roller outfits staring incredulously, at The Boomtown Rats, the Ramones, and the Talking Heads at 4 o'clock in gymnasiums. That's how we started.
Yeah, right.
But you were aware that something profound was happening, definitely. It was exciting to be in it, right at the very center of it. But again, there was so much rivalry, whose record was better, who was selling out faster. And then there was the credibility thing. A lot of it was to do with an idea of saying the right things. And by saying I wanted to get rich, get famous, and get laid, you weren't supposed to say that, because it was a rejection of all the values that had led to pop singers like Jagger or Rod Stewart just talking about the length of their limos, the height of their country houses, the width of their platform heels, that sort of shit. Nothing to do with life. It was exciting. It was even more exciting to throw records up the charts and get to see the world and have Molly Meldrum throw you off Countdown, which is what happened to us.
He threw a lot of people off Countdown.
You're saying a lot of profound things were happening, but you obviously took it one further. You began talking about Africa, probably, at least from the Australian perspective, before a lot of people were talking about what was happening in Africa when it comes to poverty and famine. What led you there? Can you explain that to us?
Well, the punk thing was hugely politically directed. You began saying that it happened during the time of Thatcher and that. And that was important. So I'll put it in perspective. Inflation in the UK in 1976, when we all emerged, was 27%. So that's zero economy. That means you don't have a job ever. That's, for the generation emerging from school, forget it. No future, as Johnny Rotten said. There is no future in England's dreaming. It's a fantastic line. In New York was bankrupt. The police were not policing. The fire service weren't answering the calls. You could barely drive there. I was there. It was bankrupt, and they pleaded for help from the federal government. And Gerald Ford, the president, on television said New York dropped dead. So of course you're going to get the Ramones and Blondie and the Talking Heads. Of course you're going to get the Pistols and the Clash in London. Of course you're going to get the Boomtown Rats in Ireland. We didn't know each other. We didn't know why we were playing fast and loud. We didn't understand that. When we all got together, we understood it was a thing. So that was essentially political, certainly cultural. When I was 13, I started anti-apartheid in school with my mate Mick Foley to organise a march to stop the Springboks playing the South African rugby team playing Ireland. Because I'd heard about the cultural boycott. Bob Dylan was reading James Baldwin, so I read James Baldwin. James Baldwin was reading Alan Paton, a book called Cry the Beloved Country, so I read that, and I learned about South Africa. Was always interested much more in music and politics, and saw the two as the same. I never saw a difference. And so, much to my dismay, Foley and I organised this march, and thousands show up for it, these two school kids at 13. So I understood you can tilt the world a little bit, by just getting stuck in. At 15, 16, I stopped going home. There was no one at home anyway. There was just me in this cold, Ireland, February, November, fog, rain, freezing, dark house, forget it.
I was there.
And I go into Dublin. I met up with a crowd called the Simon Community, which sounds religious, but they weren't. What we do is at 6 o'clock in the evening, we get all the vegetables that the grocers hadn't sold, and they'd give it to us. And then at 11 o'clock at night, the bakers would give us their first round of bakery for the morning. And we'd make a huge fire in the middle of Smithfield Market. And then all the lost people would gather about this fire, and we'd make soup. So you had the bag ladies and bag men, the schizophrenic old men and women. You had there was no divorce in Ireland until relatively recently, 12 years ago or something. So the males of the family would get together and tell the husband, time for you to go now. And so he'd be out in his ear, nowhere to go, eventually start showing up at work, still with drink on his breath, unshaved. He'd lose his job, he'd be on a park bench, they'd show up. The hookers, not the glamorous hookers of Hollywood legend, but really, really pinched, whey-faced, thin,
working girls,
little girls, with their pimps, beating them up in front of me with baseball bats because she asked for one of them asked for an orange squash. An orange squash is just diluted orange. It's not even orange juice.
Yeah.
And this, I remember very well, this little thug in a leatherette coat and a sort of Stooges haircut, like not Iggy Pop, I mean like the Three Stooges, beating her. This thing with, and I was 15. I was scared shitless, and I wasn't physical, and I could do nothing. And I still, to this, telling you about it, I'm ashamed.
Yeah.
And so this was going on. So all these books I was reading about elsewhere, Steinbeck, Studs Terkel, Woody Guthrie, James Baldwin, was happening here in Dublin. And so they were the things that always bothered me. So if you listen to the Rat songs, they're still about the stuff that bothers me. Mm-hmm. So when I said, I want to be famous to talk about the things that bother me, that's all I'm interested in. I don't want your velvet rope bollocks, it doesn't interest me. I feel a complete fucking wanker in a limousine, Now, if a Volkswagen comes to pick me up or a limousine, I'm getting in the limousine. But I still feel a complete wanker.
You can't criticise the man's platform. That's my opinion.
No.
You've got to take the roomy seats, right?
So, we started with this name to change our own lives because they were awful. By making a noise, we helped a little bit to change the country. We think that's what everyone in the film says. By making hit records, you get to change the music. And then one day, coming home at night, I'd turn on the TV and see what's happening in Africa. 30 million people, 30 million people, about to die of, appalling hunger. The images were just shocking. In a continent, and Australians don't really take this on board. In the same way they don't really take on board that Indonesia is 60 miles from Darwin. They don't take that on board.
No.
They know it is, but we don't take on board that Africa is 8 miles from Europe.
You can throw a rock from Spain. Throw a rock from Spain.
So here is the richest continent in the world still, and the poorest.
Yeah.
And in 1984, we had the Common Agricultural Policy, which was set up after the war to make sure Europe never starved again. We paid taxes to grow surplus food. We paid more taxes to store the surplus, and most disgracefully, we paid more taxes to destroy it. America was doing the same by subsidizing its farmers with the Farm Bill, which produced surplus, etc., etc. 8 miles south was 30 million people were about to die in agony. Fuck off. So the political moment arrived. I was in a rock band that had been extremely successful, was on the downturn. I was available. All I could do was write tunes. So it was October. I called up my missus, who was the host of the big rock show at the time, The Tube. And I said, who's on it? And it was Ultravox. They just had their big hit Vienna, Midge. I spoke to Midge and I said, listen, I don't know if you saw that thing. All these new kids that had sort of pushed now the punky thing aside, Duran Duran, because Thatcher was now in power, so they were emblematic of that, really. Spandau Ballet, The Police, U2 were coming up on the inside track. I knew them all because of my missus on the Tube or because they were contemporaries.
Yeah.
So I said, let's do a song. Let's sell as many of these, and that's it, we're done. Of course, Do They Know It's Christmas becomes this phenomenon, which neither I nor Midge expected. I get a call from Michael Jackson and Harry Belafonte. Right. They want to do it in America, so I go and do that. And then having done those two, the logic of doing Live Aid was obvious. Join these two ideas up.
Was it harder to corral the love of your life up to the Yukon, or was it harder to corral a group of the biggest pop stars in the world together into one room to sing Do They Know It's Christmas Time? What was harder? Dude,
you're forgetting my story. You see, this is it. This is the. I got so fed up with shit journalism. And
fake news.
I said to you, I was working in a slaughterhouse. She was getting free sausages every night. She was getting kidneys and liver and sweetbreads. It was the offal that did it. I couldn't offer that to Simon Le Bon and and Bono. They were, but it was easy. That's the truth. You know, I'd known these guys. I'd been in rock and roll for 10 years by that period. Sting is literally a day older than me. So, you know, when they were starting, they'd come and see the Rats. Bono, I knew from Dublin. He used to come and see us in the basement of a hotel we played. This sort of tubby little kid would come in. And,
Hello, Brian.
You know, so it was... and then I knew Le Bon used to come to this place I am now, this house here, weekends and just crash out on the floor. Because, you know, when you're going for it, you're seriously going for it.
Yeah.
So that was okay. And this stuff about, hey, the egos in the room, really, you know, you're with people who are rivals. It's nothing to do with the egos. So you kind of think, fuck, they just made a great record, you know. So I saw a great bit of film I'd never seen on this film about the Rats. George Michael is there. He said, like, you know, well, I've got one day off, you know, I could do with the rest, but I'd show up here. He said, I'm a bit pissed off because I've written a Christmas song myself. And my missus says to him, oh, well, sing me a bit. And he goes, no. And she says, sing me a bit. And he goes, last Christmas, I gave you my heart, but the very next day. And like, and she said, that's quite good, but it's not as good as Bob's. And he goes, I don't think so. You know, so that's pretty cool because that is such a good Christmas song. You know, not as good as Fairy Tale in New York, but pretty good.
I need to ask now your honest opinion. There may have been a bit of revisionist history around of late. The movie that recently came out about Queen.
Yeah.
Did it really come down to Freddie Mercury turning it on the day?
No, not at all. I mean, I haven't seen the movie because I don't listen or to myself or look at myself or read anything about myself because it just drives me nuts. This sounds name droppy, but believe me, Roger is a seriously proper mate, like, you know, hanging together. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that Queen were almost done. Mm-hmm. They finished up an Australia world tour. It hadn't been very successful. And Freddie, they were all a bit fed up, not knowing where it was going to go. So when I called them, I was calling them because Harvey Goldsmith, the English promoter who promotes them, was putting together Live Aid. He was the one who put the physical thing together. And Harvey said, you got to get Queen. I went, you know, again, they're not called The Queen, so there's a problem there. But you know, so I said, okay, but I didn't really mind if they played or not. They weren't essential to the gig. So when I called them, Rog, who wasn't a big mate then, but, you know, we knew each other and liked each other. He said, he said, I don't know, Bob, we're tired. The atmosphere isn't good. You have to speak to Fred. Fred called me about 2 days later. He goes, Bobsy, darling, what can I do for you? And I said, well, you know, he says, oh, we know what you're doing. It's wonderful. We all appreciate it, but I'm not sure it's for us. Sort of like that. And I said, well, why not? And he then said, I don't know what we're going to do. I might go off and do a solo thing. So I really sometimes will put a moral arm lock on some guys. Like with Pete Townsend of The Who, he said he'd never, ever get on stage with Roger Daltrey again. And I said, but Pete, if The Who do My Generation, 6 million people minimum will watch. And of those 6 million, 2 million will put some money in the pot. If you don't get together and do My Generation, we've lost that 20 million quid, you know. So he goes, for fuck's sake. So, you know, but with Roger, I really wasn't going to do that, or with Fred, I wasn't going to do it because it didn't bother me that much. So I eventually said to Fred, I said, look, Fred, if ever there was a stage built for you, it's this. And he goes, well, what do you mean, darling? And I said, well, darling, the world. And he said, yes, I think I see what you're getting at. He just said. And so they came, and what was really different was they really got what it was about. And I also think they thought it was going to be their last gig ever.
Yeah, right.
So what they did was put together a jukebox, a medley of their tunes. I'd explained to Freddie that I'm calling it the global jukebox. So I don't want track 3, side 2 of your most obscure album. Fuck off.
Yeah.
I want hits. 3 hits, goodbye. And they sandwiched all their hits, the hooks of their hits, which, were okay. It was a bit overblown for me, a bit operatic for me, not my thing really. But when you take the hooks, they're fantastic pop.
Yeah.
And they jammed them together brilliantly. And so they came out believing this was going to be their last hurrah, and it was to the world. So Freddie was going to go out with a bang, and they were going to tell people what they'd done by doing all these hits. So I'm running around trying to organise stuff, freaking out that maybe the money isn't coming on quick enough. And I'm up in the top gantry at Wembley Stadium, running towards the broadcast area. And I hear this immense noise. And I look over, and it's Queen. And I go, Queen? People are going nuts. And the sound from the stage was better than any other band, that's for sure.
Yeah, right.
The sound guy had it completely down, and they sounded amazing. Amazing. Now, I was never convinced by Freddie, a very unlikely frontman. The teeth, the crap moustache, the awful outfits, the sort of static poses he'd do. I thought, no, not really. I was wrong. And but they went off, and without backstage, so, Bowie's there, fucking Townsend's there, McCartney's there, Bono's backstage, everyone's going, Elton's going, what? Literally, what?
Yeah, right.
Queen? Seriously, they just went to a whole other level for themselves, and they felt it, because I spoke to Raj, I went, dude, and he said that was amazing. Raj will tell you now, they were about 6 minutes in before he understood there was a difference between their normal stuff, okay?
Yeah.
Most bands went to some other place in their performance. If you look at Live Aid, if you get the DVDs or download on YouTube, if you look at it, Bowie's somewhere else in his performance. Amazing. Yeah. Elton's just thrilled with the day. McCartney hasn't played for years, doesn't give a fuck that the sound goes down, because Pete and David and I come out to help him sing Let It Be, and the whole crowd just take it over and he just shuts up. So they were someplace else. Why, I don't know. But what the film says is that when they played, that's when the phone lines collapsed and people phoned in. That's not true. Everyone thought they were just amazing. But where the phone lines collapsed was when Bowie played. David, what people don't really take on board about Bowie is that while he was the great artist, he was also a really lovely guy, a cool guy, a fun guy to hang with, really kind man. And, which is kind of weird, because you don't think that of the austere Bowie. So I showed Bowie this film I've got, an editor from Canadian Broadcasting who couldn't show the movies he'd made of starving people because it was too obscene almost. And he was cutting the bits together to archive in a hotel in Addis, and he was listening to the Cars song, Who's Gonna Drive You Home, on his Walkman in the 80s. And he was cutting to that beat unconsciously. And when he'd finished, he played it back and suddenly realised that the words of that song took on a different meaning when he played with this horror. So who's going to pick you up when you fall down? Who's going to drive you home tonight? And I played that to David when he was asking me, what song should I do? And I said, hold on, let's look at this. And David Bowie sat beside me in this office, sobbing. And he said, I'm not doing 4 songs, I'm doing 3, and I'm introducing this. And I said, David, if you stop, they go and make tea, and they're not coming back. I've lost the audience. And he said, I don't care, I'm showing this. I said, when they show this, they're definitely turning off the television. Yeah. So I don't care, I'm showing this. So, okay. So Bowie does Heroes at the end, place kicks off, and he goes, I want you to remember what this is for. And he shows the film. And if you look at the DVD or YouTube, you'd see, both in America and the UK, these beautiful young people. I mean, really, girls at their most beautiful flowers on their boyfriends' naked shoulders in the heat of this hugely hot day. And they're all like this, they're laughing and smiling, it's the time of their life, and they've forgotten what it's about. And then Bowie directs them to the film, and you can see the girl's arms coming down, and then they they start crying, and then they try and get off the boyfriend's shoulders, and the boys are just staring with horror at the screen.
Yeah.
And that's when the phones collapsed.
Really?
Literally everywhere in the world, phone lines just melted down. And that's when the money just came gushing in and didn't stop. So that's what actually happened.
So Bowie had a bit more of a marketing brain. Is that what you're saying?
I think that, Queen definitely took the day.
Yeah.
I think by anyone's standards, that's what the press said, and I wouldn't say it, but I absolutely believe that to be the case. Everyone did. U2 went over the top. They were on the crest. They thought they'd blown it. They had a huge row at the side of the stage. They were going to break up because they thought Bono had blown it by going into the audience, but in fact it pushed them over into superstardom. Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms album had stopped dead at 350,000. Post Live Aid it did 3.5 million. So millions of bands did well out of it, but loads stayed where they are made no. But the point is that none of those bands, not a one, and I'm telling you this, did it for any other reason than to be there on the day. Led Zeppelin reformed. They didn't like each other. Black Sabbath reformed. They didn't like each other. The Who reformed. The Beach Boys reformed. Duran Duran reformed. Clapton gave up a week in Vegas just to fly to Philadelphia and just play. Yeah. Nobody was there for any other reason than just to do it.
So did you take what you said to Roger Taylor at Live Aid and kind of apply that to Roger Waters for Live 8? I mean, because that was really the you made Pigs Fly then, and that was really Pink Floyd's last ever gig with the surviving 4 members. That was it. That's it.
Yeah. They hadn't played for 25 years. I'd read we needed an ending equivalent to Live Aid 20 years before.
Yeah.
And I'd read in an interview by Nick Mason that the only reason he could ever possibly see them get back together was something like Live Aid. Nick is a friend of Roger's. I got the number, I called Nick, and he said we need a reason outside of ourselves to get back together, but it'll be Roger and David.
Yeah.
And I knew them from doing the movie The Wall. I had done the Wall movie.
It's nice to see you've got your eyebrows back after that. It's good.
Yeah, thanks. Good. Yeah, good. I'm glad to see you like Queen and the Pink Floyd. What's he doing? What's he doing on this thing? Oh, you're the editor-in-chief. Yeah, fucking throw him off. Queen and Pink Floyd. He dares to talk about music. Let's say. So I call Roger, and he says, well, I'd do it, but, David won't. I'd played with Gilmore at the Festival Hall in Britain. I'd done Comfortably Numb, I think, with him. So I called David, and he said, absolutely no, I'm not going to do it. He said, you're joking. And I said, well, look, can I come down and speak to you? And he said, no, you can't. And I said, hear me out at least. And he said, for fuck's sake. So this took a while. They're all very quite posh accents, the Floyd.
They're all from Cambridge,
you see, I put the definite article back in there, the Floyd. See what I did? Yeah, I made them valid again.
Helping them out.
Yeah. So I go down, and I'm halfway down to his place, and I have to change trains at East Croydon. And I'm there, and the phone rings. Don't come, I've changed my mind, I don't want to see you. And I said, fuck off. I said, I'm in East Croydon, a shithole. and I said, you know what, I'm not changing, I'm coming, and meet me at the station. So he goes, fuck's sake. So he meets me, I'm sitting in the kitchen, I lay out the argument. And so from a Pink Floyd perspective, the argument was, you never actually said goodbye. I said to millions upon millions of people who bought your records, I mean, countless millions. Dark Side of the Moon is still in the top 200.
You're pretty good at that. You're pretty good at that moral arm lock, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah. When it needs to be. Yeah. So he goes, I don't care. His wife was there making tea, and she wasn't helping. So anyway, I said, think about it. He goes, no, I won't. So we're there for about an hour and a half. And I said, give me a lift back to the station. So he does. He goes, it's going to be no, Bob, he said at the end. And I said, well, let's see. I go home and I write a letter to him, a long letter, laying out his points and my points. The phone rings, it's Waters. What did he say? He said no. And I called Nick. And I said, it's going to take Roger calling David. That's what it's going to take. So I laid the groundwork. Roger Waters calls me and says, have you got Dave Gilmore's number? I mean, Waters doesn't have Gilmore's number. I do. So I give Roger what Dave Gilmore's number. And 3 days later, he calls me and says he'll do it. So many ghosts were laid to rest, which I was happy about. And they were very generous. They allowed us to film the rehearsals because they're notoriously secretive, and let us use all that stuff. So once they were in, they threw themselves in. And to your point, on the night, it was fantastic, just fantastic. I mean, the figures were enormous. They came on just before Paul, I think. Paul and Bono had opened it with, there was the Beatles, it was 20 years ago today, referring back to Live Aid. But people forget that it was all politics for me. Band Aid was a 20-year pop. First you keep as many people alive as you can. Then, famine doesn't happen because you've got no food. It happens because you're poor. Mm-hmm. In Australia, there won't be a famine. You've got a lot of drought, but you buy in food, you import food, you do whatever. You're not poor. So it's only the poor die. And that's why I said, I want to be rich. It's shit, always. It's a definition of lack of opportunity to be poor. It's a destruction of human potential. It has to stop, and it can, and it will stop. We've already eliminated 50% of the world's poor since the year 2000. That's incredible. 50% of the extreme poor has dropped. For me, once I trawled through the horror of the things I had to trawl through, I understood that this was about economics. And the way to alter economics is to engage with the agents of change in our world, which is why I flew down to see Bob Hawke, which we talked about off air, I think, earlier.
Yeah.
And you start there. The number of people watching Live Aid had given us, I think 200 million Aussie dollars or something at the time, maybe more at the time. And we had 650 trucks operating in Africa, 12 ships going up and down from Europe, etc., etc. But the big thing was the numbers of people watching, 1.5 billion, allowed me into the White House, into the Kremlin, into the Vatican, into the Reichstag, into the Elysee Palace, into Downing Street.
Into Canberra.
Began the political, into Canberra. You began the political. Well, it was important because Bob Hawke gave us 4 Aussie Air Force transporters, which kept Thatcher in there. Thatcher was going to remove the 13 RAF transporters, which are transporting food out of Port Sudan to Darfur, which was, 1,000 miles away. And so the argument with Bob Hawke was, if you bring the Aussies in, it'll force the Brits to stay. So the Aussies showed up, and the Brits had to stay. All the
that's
crews
the best argument you could ever have to do anything in this country is if it makes the English look bad, we will be there first in line, hand in hand with the Irish.
I know where your head's at. Don't worry, I've got you guys down. And, it took 20 years, and eventually a generation come to power that were entirely consumed with the idea of Live Aid. Blair, Brown, Osborne, Cameron, Schroeder, Clinton. They'd all watched it. And I went through Africa with George Bush on the presidential plane. And, Bush claimed to have watched Live Aid. And I said, no, you didn't, Mr. President. He goes, yeah, I did, Bob. We call me Geldof. He said, yeah, I did, Geldof. And I said, you didn't watch Live Aid? He goes, yeah, I remember it very well. I said, one, you don't remember anything, but you certainly watched. And he goes, well, why do you say that? I said, because there was no country music in Live Aid. He goes, that's a good point. So they were willing to do stuff, providing there was a new public behind it. Yeah. So that's why Live Aid happened. And the following day was the G8, and they eventually agreed to eliminate the debt of the poorest people. So this if you're in debt in Australia, if you've got a mortgage that you can't pay, it's done. You're over. You're crippled. Yeah. And that's what happens to countries. So they eliminated that and doubled aid. So that's why Live Aid happened. That's why all these things happen for me. It's that end goal rather than the music. It just so happens that the music turned out to be exceptional.
With the advent of the internet, it'd be pretty hard now to pick. There's so much mainstream. Exactly. There's so much mainstream. But when you were, particularly the first time, you had so much at your disposal, at your fingertips. The crowds you're working in were at the centre of that.
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, these things really just wouldn't work again. I mean, Lady Gaga tried to do a thing for the lockdown. I mean, well done her, but it was pretty crap. I mean, I think the figures were negligible, really.
How would you go nowadays trying to find the right K-pop band to include? That's how you get your numbers.
It's easy. You just get the one who's selling most on that moment. But I mean, it's not going to have an effect because the internet has a weird pseudo intimacy. Mm-hmm. So it because it's constantly there and constantly, it lets in the light into the magic. That's a terrible cliche, but it's true. Yeah. Stars need to be at a distance, and previously media, by definition, implied distance. You heard it on the radio, you saw them for a moment on television, but you couldn't get to them. Now everyone pretends they're in their fucking front room, or they're Taylor Swift talks. They think they're talking all the time to them directly. It's a trick. Yeah. And because it's a constant, there isn't any exclusivity to it. So I don't think it would work. Somebody will do something like this. And, I do Band-Aid every single day of the week. It still operates hugely. And we do a lot of stuff kind of online, which, but it's more to do with meetings and stuff like that. So, it wouldn't be the same,
Just one more question. If you could have any band in the world right now reform for another Live Aid type concert, who would it be?
Limp Bizkit.
The Boomtown Rats.
Other than the Boomtown Rats.
We found the long game here with this new movie.
Are you coming back, Bob?
What do you mean coming back?
Coming back
to Australia?
Coming back to us.
Coming back to us.
Are you coming back to Gundawindi? Because
I mean,
that's our closest big town that you go to. So
I know that. I mean, I'd be back. I loved it. That's the truth. Yeah. And everyone says, "Hey, I love you in Australia." I actually do. I'm very much at home there. I've been going there for 100 years, and it's a good crowd. Good crowd. I laughed. They're very. Look, the culture of Australia is far more familiar to me as Irish than it is as English. Yeah, that's right. The attitudes are very hail fellow, well met, less bullshit please, do you fancy a pint? That's kind of it. Absolutely. And that's very familiar to me and comforting to me. So I drop off there, cool. And I don't feel weird or a distance. But it's an interesting place because it doesn't look like what I'm used to. So I'll be back in a second. We've talked to promoters and that. Would there be any interest in seeing us? And no. If somebody plays the record, yes, because it's a good record, got rave reviews. The film went through the roof. Massive response to it, which is kind of weird. Radio is playing our stuff again. Great. I know a lot of bands down there that I like. We go at the drop of a hat. That's the honest to God's truth. But when it gets to be summer,
We'll book you in for the Birdsville races then.
Yeah, great, whatever that means. I laugh anyway to go along with it, having the clue to talk about.
All right.
So who would I put back together again? Nirvana.
Yep.
So I'd resurrect Kurt.
The Nirvana.
Yeah.
Yep. I'd do Oasis.
Yep.
Yeah.
That would be hard. They can't stand each other.
Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, maybe.
Well, we had Neil on both 20 and Live Aid.
Yeah.
If you're going to push me in one way, I'll take Neil Young, especially when he does the hardcore.
His voice hasn't changed that much anyway over the past 40 years anyway.
And I wanted to do the.
I bought that record he did with Jack White, mind you. I didn't mind it at all.
Yeah.
No, when he does that heavy guitar, forget Metallica. That is the heaviest guitar.
The Godfather of grunge.
History.
Yeah.
It's like, so I've seen him a lot. As you say, he's still totally real.
Yeah.
Neil Young. It's completely all there, and so
he does the aid for the farmers too.
Yeah, Palm Aid.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does that. I mean, again, that's spun off of Live Aid because Dylan in Live Aid says, maybe we should do something for the farmers. And 2 weeks later, Willie Nelson called me.
Yeah,
It's so cool. Willie Nelson? I adore Willie Nelson.
Yeah.
And he goes, do you want to, maybe you can help me do this? And I said, Willie, you just put on a gig and get your mates, So that was the first Farm Aid, yeah.
The Highwaymen?
Oh, man.
Just call the Highwaymen, Willie.
Well, you can't, because Johnny's dead and Chris can't sing anymore, really. That clip on YouTube of them at their best, unbelievable. What a band, what an amazing band. I mean, they'd be on again, I'd put the Highwaymen together again if I could, they'd be cool. Yeah, so everyone. But really, where I'm at myself is the day our album came out, the day the tour was announced, lockdown was announced 2 hours later. Yeah. So, we were dead in the water. We rescheduled the tour. But will anyone come to gigs for the next year? I mean, are you going to be absolutely sure you want to stand beside somebody sweating and jumping around?
Well, there's not too many cases here now.
That might mean you're touring here before there, I reckon.
Because
you just have to come here and guarantee with a test.
Yeah, but seriously, even then, are you going to throw yourself into a 20,000 festival?
In this country,
it's just
yes,
lurking
yes, of course.
You know how reckless they are.
In this country,
we've had a few friends that actually have released albums similar time to you. Have you ever heard of the DMAs? They're an Australian band, and they'd just come back. They got one last tour in of England. And they were saying that it actually feels like you're just kind of, the wind's taken out of the sails, but not only that, like they get to see the result because everyone's still listening to music. They get to see the popularity of the album, but it does feel like you're suspended in time, like the tour's coming, but you don't know when.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Like, I'm paddling, I'm treading water here, and I'm taking the opportunity to speak to you guys and stuff like that, but I hope we get together and that nothing results from it, but if it does, we're in deep trouble. I mean, it's not fun, this thing. It's a serious thing.
Well, only time will tell.
Thank you for joining us, Bob Geldof. That was obviously very humbling for us in our original, Queensland newspaper to get you on air.
Yeah.
We all remember seeing you on TV. I think Australia would have been one of, per capita most tuned in to Live Aid and, of course, Live 8.
Because there was not much else going on here in the 80s.
No, but you started it.
Yeah.
You guys actually began it, because when I got up in the morning and turned on TV, Live Aid was happening under you guys.
Yeah, right.
Well, I did that thing. What's the name of the TV show? A comedian begins with R.
Rove.
Rove.
Yeah.
I did Rove, and they did the thing.
Back then.
I was guest on the thing. They were doing this thing, Kiwi Aid, about a country very far with problems.
Well, they've still got a lot of problems. Let me tell you that.
But they'll beat us to getting rid of coronavirus, so that's for sure.
But rugby union's not one of them. I'll tell you that. All right, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
It's been very nice. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Fun. Bye-bye.